Hey everyone, Mr. Happy here, and welcome to Happy's Thoughts. This is just a video series where I talk about whatever's on my mind. It could be a top 3 favorite game list, like it'll be today. It could be my thoughts on a recent game that came out. It could be about a discussion that's happening in Final Fantasy XIV, or gaming in general. But today, I'm going to be talking about something I'm surprised I never made a video about on this channel after the last 4 years. My top 3 favorite Final Fantasy games. Come on, I get asked this all the time. Just to be clear, these aren't the ones I necessarily think are the best. They're just my favorites, meaning it's an opinion, meaning you don't have to agree, meaning don't threaten to punch me in the face in my comment section because I didn't put your game on the list. Sorry, but I might just not agree with you. I'll split this video in 2 halves. The first half is going to be my 3 favorite games, and then I'll talk about each of the games that didn't make it into my top 3 and why individually after that. So let's get started. So, number 3 on my list is actually a pretty recent one, the recently re-released Final Fantasy XII Zodiac Age, also known more traditionally as the International Zodiac Job System. Previously, Final Fantasy XII was actually pretty low on my list for a handful of reasons, and we'll get into those a little bit here. But playing the international version, specifically Zodiac Age, brought it way higher on my list, and it's a game I definitely look forward to playing again when it hopefully hits the PC. So why do I like this one in particular? Well, with Zodiac Age, or the International Zodiac Job System, playthroughs are so flexible and unique depending on job choices. You can go with just one job on each character like the old Zodiac Edition. You can go with the double jobs like Zodiac Age. You can do whatever you want with it, and you can do different playthroughs constantly, and you have to accurately adapt your strategy in every single one. I also did a playthrough on New Game Minus, and though I didn't finish all the optional stuff, that was an incredibly fun playthrough to do. Now, this one's going to surprise people, but despite some odd character choices, I actually kind of enjoy Final Fantasy XII's story. Yeah, it kind of drops the ball in a few places, but I found it to be an overall enjoyable story of, war between nations. One of the biggest selling points for me, and even with the original version, which I wasn't a huge fan of, was the incredible world and how rewarding exploration is, on top of all the optional contents, especially the hunts. And honestly, you guys know I played 11, I play Final Fantasy XIV, it's like a single-player MMO, and while I'm not a huge fan of playing MMOs single-player, it just feels really familiar and really comfortable to me when playing this game. And I guess the last reason I enjoy it so much is it's actually full of memorable moments from the franchise. I connect with people about this game in so many different ways. You can facepalm all you want, but I'm Captain Bosch von Rosenberg of Dalmasca is something we all remember and laugh about, for better or worse. Also, I love making fun of Von. And on top of that, the Gambit system. It's such a good AI customization that every time another game does bad AI customization, I go, why don't we just have Gambits? Now, it's 3rd place on my list and not 1st place for a reason. Big one is RNG. This game pads its lifetime in terms of optional content with RNG on RNG on RNG, especially the treasure chests and what you can obtain in them. I've seen games manipulated before for things like speedruns, but for this game, learning how to manipulate the RNG is practically a normality. Now, while I did mention that I loved the Gambit system and the AI customization, it was less true in Zodiac Age, but it sometimes feels a little too autopiloted, especially through parts of the game where you'd expect I'd probably want manual control a little bit more. That can be good or bad, depending on what you're doing. Like, I like it when I'm grinding mindlessly, because honestly, no matter what RPG I'm playing, if I'm grinding, it's mindless anyway. Oh, and definitely one of my biggest cons for this game is Von. Not even Penelo, just Von. Alright, so with Final Fantasy XII out of the way, let's move up to number 2. And number 2 for me is going to be the previous single-player game of Final Fantasy X. Guess I should have mentioned that I'm excluding the MMOs from this one, because that's not really fair for me. So why Final Fantasy X? Final Fantasy X definitely has its ups and downs. For me, it's definitely a little bit of nostalgia with this one, obviously being the first PlayStation 2 era Final Fantasy game, and I'm someone who was initially introduced to the series on PlayStation 1. It holds a bit of nostalgic value to me, but that doesn't mean that's the only thing carrying it to the number 2 place. For me, it's the perfect non-ATB turn-based combat. I love the tracker for whose turn is when and analyzing the speed. It's just something that's so classic, yet done on a new-ish game, at least newish for the time. If I'm going to go non-ATB, I'm always going to think to Final Fantasy X as a favorite. The sphere grid is actually something I like. There are things I don't like about the sphere grid in particular, but when I'm going through the game itself, I do like making the occasional choice. Oh, should I go for this? Should I go for that? And it being a single-player game, it feels okay to say maybe something that's not considered the norm when other people play through it. I like that. One big thing that carries it is definitely Spira itself. A world that's so ingrained in the story and the history of this world and why the story is taking place. It's beautiful, it's interesting, and I love every moment every time I play through 10. And honestly, despite the quirky voice acting at times, it has a heartfelt story, one that always gets me tearing up through several portions of the game itself. Also, I love me some optional content, and especially with the International Edition, we got some optional content. I love going through this game's optional content every time I play. Only the final optional super boss am I not a big fan of, and it's only because that fight rests on like a knife's edge to the point where it's not even that fun to me. Oh, and Overworld. Like, OST for all Final Fantasy games are great, even the ones I don't like, but Overworld. So what don't I like about Final Fantasy X? Well, you picked up a few things there, but this one's going to piss some people off. Blitzball. Sorry, I'm just not a fan of underwater soccer. It's more of a hurdle than a pleasure that I just, if anything, when I try to do it, I just find the least path of least resistance, and I just do that. I can't talk about Final Fantasy X without talking about the fact that its maps are pretty linear. The game does actually still find a decent enough way to reward exploration, even in the dungeons that are in the game itself. Especially in the second half of the game, it feels really good to go out and explore all the various nooks and crannies of the world. I mentioned this one earlier, but I'll mention it again. The voice acting of some of the cast. Ha 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 ha! Now, that's it for 10, but I do want to make special mention of 10-2. I don't particularly like that game, but I want to say that the combat system in 10-2, at least to me, is like one of the best across all of the Final Fantasy franchise. I just mute the game and play 10-2 that way. Alright, that's it for the number 2 spot. So number 1, most of you probably already know what this is. It's something that's super obvious, and a bunch of other people feel the same way, but my number 1 is Final Fantasy VI, or if you somehow haven't been keeping up with the times, Final Fantasy III back on the Super Nintendo. So why Final Fantasy VI? Again, admittedly, it's not a perfect game. Obviously, the villain is a big one. Kefka is my favorite villain across the entire series, especially when I see him reincarnated in things like Dissidia. I always love seeing how he's going to act when he's kind of made more animated outside of sprites. For the combat system, it's classic ATB-style combat. I can't really find any faults in the combat system. It's just something that I love playing every time I do it. Big selling point for me, the number of characters and how interesting some of them are. Almost every Final Fantasy game, I go through a cast and I go, oh God, I don't want to listen to this person talk, or oh my God, just get this person off the screen. I don't have that with Final Fantasy VI. I always like, oh man, I want to know more about this character, and that's every character in the game to me, which just doesn't happen in most of the Final Fantasy games. I've said this with like all 3 of them, but the world. It's filled with optional content, it's rewarding to explore, and for me that's gotta be a big thing. It also has my favorite boss battle theme across all the games. The decisive battle. Like, it's the best theme for me. I will always get hyped when I hear it. Something I recently grew an appreciation for with 6 that normally wouldn't have been on this list is the progression system. I realize that I always abuse it kind of with the way that espers work, and I'll talk about that as a negative point as well. I find myself leveling very little in the beginning of the game, and then as soon as I get espers, I go crazy on leveling. But I realized when I first played through it, I didn't know that I was going to get espers and the way the leveling system was going to work. But it didn't hinder my experience at all, you know? And I think back to that, and I had just as good a time not knowing what it did as when I did know how to use it. So the fact that the progression system is so traditional early on, but allows for even greater growth with espers at a certain point in the game where it feels just right, is something I've recently grown an appreciation for. That being said, moving on to things I don't like about Final Fantasy VI, leveling without espers versus leveling with them later on, it does kind of feel like a beginner's trap for over-leveling early game to get over the hurdles. But like I said, I feel like you overcome it as soon as you do get espers. That's when it really begins. And also, mentioning that I loved all the characters and I always wanted to know more, that feeling of wanting to know more is kind of backed up by the fact that maybe I just didn't get enough of these characters. They were interesting enough for me to want more, and maybe that's all they wanted to give me. But I felt like because this game doesn't really feel like it has a central character, which is by design, I was never all the way satisfied with the characters and the way their stories are wrapped up. I mean, the game felt to me at least like it wanted me to focus on Kefka and Terra, but you almost feel as if she's a non-component after a certain point of the game, or you can at least choose to have her be a non-component, and I'm not a big fan of that. Also, this one, this isn't really a negative, but it's got the old school sprites, and I love those, but it's just, you know, that's not really positive or negative for me. It's just, I just wanted to mention it. So those are my top 3 for Final Fantasy games. It's something I'm amazed I never made a video about on the channel, but what about all the other ones? We're just going to go through the numbered ones. I'm going to leave stuff like Type 0 and Crisis Core out, which I have my opinions on those altogether. So let's just focus on the numbered series. So, Final Fantasy 1. It's a classic. I love playing it, especially the Dawn of Souls version, but it's in many ways, it's just too generic. It was the first Final Fantasy, you know, they hadn't ironed out a lot of the things. It's a classic, but it's nothing standoutish. Final Fantasy 2... it tries to me feel a bit more D&D in terms of like your character progression with the way you gain stats, and in my opinion, it just completely falls flat. It's my least favorite. I hate playing this game every time I play through it, whether it be for an event or something. It has some good characters and moments, but I just don't like Final Fantasy 2. Final Fantasy 3 is simply, to me, kind of just like an inferior choice to Final Fantasy 5. Even with the re-releases and remakes, it's just, I don't find the characters interesting, the world feels generic, and the game just feels bland, and the job system just not all the way thought out. Final Fantasy 4 is one some people are probably surprised to not see on the list for top 4. It would have been in top 5. I love Final Fantasy 4. It just didn't beat over the other 3 titles, so it's just a top 5 game. Final Fantasy V, also similar to Final Fantasy IV. I said Final Fantasy III was like the inferior Final Fantasy V, and the more I've played Final Fantasy V over the years, the more I enjoy that game. And again, it's a top 5 spot. In case you're wondering, against Final Fantasy IV, I'd put this at number 4 and Final Fantasy IV at number 5, mostly because of the job system. Final Fantasy VII is middle of the pack for me. I know it's like one of the most popular games of all time, and it's just created this legend, but when I first saw it, you know, the graphics were unappealing, and even to this day, I don't really enjoy looking at Horsehoof Cloud. The materia system, when I was young, I didn't really understand it, and now that I do, I don't like it very much. And the game is full of plot holes that we ended up getting the compilation of Final Fantasy VII-4, and then they created even more plot inconsistencies. So, for me, the original Final Fantasy VII, it's a classic, but for me, it's middle of the pack if I had to look at it objectively. I do occasionally enjoy riding the gondola with this game, but it's not one that I force myself to play every so often. Now, Final Fantasy VIII is also middle of the pack for me. This was actually my first Final Fantasy. I played 8, then 7, then 9. That was my initial order before playing 5 and 6 on anthologies. It hasn't aged well for me, though. It has the makings of something great, but they just missed the bar on a few things, like the level scaling of your opponents and the drawn junction system, which sounds so cool on paper, but this just don't get along with each other all that well. It's just missing some checks and balances to get the feel right. It's a game I'd love to see a remake of, not over some of the other titles, but just to see if they could get it right. Also, Triple Triad's the best. Final Fantasy IX is another game people are probably surprised to not see, even in the top 5. I've especially gained some appreciation for this with recent re-releases of the game. However, for me, the ATB system for this game is among the most unsatisfying across the entire series. And to be honest, other than Vivi, I don't really care about any of these characters. I make fun of them and it's fun to do, but I have no emotional connection or attachment or even remote desire to see them achieve their goals outside of Vivi. You the best, Vivi. Now, obviously, we're skipping 11, and 10 and 12 are on the list, so 13 is next, and this is easily the most controversial one. And I'm expecting you guys, expect me to destroy this game's anus. I actually don't hate it that much after I've played through it over the years. When I first bought it, I watched a friend play it and returned it without even opening it. That is the most unfair first impression, first chance I've ever given a game, especially a Final Fantasy game. With this game, there's so many arguments. The linearity argument, I played Final Fantasy X, and Final Fantasy X is also very linear. And to be fair, almost every Final Fantasy game is linear up until you get a vehicle of some kind, like an airship. Yes, you are thrown in a world map, but very infrequently are they actually open world. You're always heavily limited on the number of locations you can visit. However, the linearity of 13 is taken to an extreme. Final Fantasy X, for example, filled its linear areas with far more interesting things to find. And also in most of Final Fantasy XIII's world, you can't revisit it. You can't go back and find some secret that you missed. Final Fantasy X is actively encouraged to come back when you have the proper tools of discovering new things. 13, you get to Grand Paulson, and there's your world to explore. For me, also with 13, the sequels destroyed any emotion the base game might have had, though 13.2 has one of my favorite villains of Caius Ballad, hashtag Caius Ballad for Dissidia 2018, and Lightning Returns has a combat system that I at least enjoy. Then we hit the most recent one and the most recent controversial one of Final Fantasy 15. Believe it or not, that occupied my third place spot for a few months after its release, but has since fallen to like 6th. I love min-maxing the otherwise simple combat and finding all the secrets and tricks the game had to offer. It had more depth than I guess expected and how most people kind of experience it. I guess the thing is you absolutely need none of that depth to play through the game. And if you do that, and if you do understand the depth, then the difficulty of the game shoots down to a below zero, as a matter of fact. It's already 0 before you discover all the tips and tricks. It's below 0 after you figure it out. I mean, there's so many things that could have been improved, and you've seen that with quality of life updates to the game over the last year. Hell, even the multiplayer DLC is a better magic system than the base game. So I want to rejudge this one after the PC release, playing it through again with all the quality of life things that are going to be in there since the last time I played. I even did a level 1 playthrough of 15. It's not challenging at all. It just isn't, because there's options. Yeah, it's lower on my list. I still enjoy Final Fantasy 15 probably more than a lot of other people do, but it can't be top 3. It can't even be top 5 anymore. I just can't allow it. I'm sure you might be wondering, what about Type 0? What about Crisis Core? Like I said, we're going to leave those out if I want to. Maybe I'll do a Happy's Thoughts on spin-off games at another point. But this is just such an overdue video. I had to do it, especially with the new year coming, looking back at 2017. I didn't even do this for Count Up when I did it in 2016. So anyway, that's going to be a wrap for this video. Thank you for watching. Be sure to like, favorite, subscribe, and share. And let me know if you want to know my thoughts about anything else in the Final Fantasy series. Anything in particular about different things in the Final Fantasy series. I'd be happy to make a video on it. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Until then, take care.